Very good evening to everyone present here today. Mr. Vivek Goenka, all the distinguished award winners and members of this distinguished audience. 25th of June 1975 is a defining moment in our history. In so many ways, that one proclamation defined and redefined for us our perception of liberty and of the threats to liberty and how tenuous liberty can be. I was 15 going on to 16 when the emergency was declared, and one of the defining moments of that period was a blank editorial in the Indian Express, which we saw a short while ago, which is a reminder to us that we can be as powerful in silence as we can be in speech. But in so many which ways, Ramnath ji was really the torchbearer of freedom, and perhaps one of the reasons why we can be so open in our discussions at forums such as these. He really was the fearless crusader for freedom. Those were fearful times, but those fearful times also gave rise to fearless journalists, which is why we celebrate these awards today as symbolizing our eternal sense of optimism on which we hope the nation will continue. Speaking for myself, the government of the day decided to corner the Indian Express in every which way. In the early 80s, I was a young lawyer, and the Indian Express was confronted with show cause notices of collectors of customs, collectors of excise, because it's not just the police who hound those who pursue our quest for freedom. As a young lawyer, I've spent many a night in Express Towers dictating that petition under Article 226 of the Constitution to challenge the notice by the collector of customs, the commissioner of customs as he is now called, as they are now called. But in so many which ways, I think my association with the Indian Express and my personal sense of homage to Mr. Ramnath Goenka is what brings me here before all of you today. At the very outset, I extend my congratulations to the winners in all the categories of the awards presented today. Earlier today, I was browsing through the categories in which the awards are presented, as well as the stories of the previous winners. I must say and confess that I am tremendously impressed by the depth and breadth of the reportage that journalists in our country engage in, particularly in the language media, in the regional media. To those journalists who were not selected, you are no less a winner in the game of life, for yours is a noble profession. To have chosen it all, especially when more lucrative options are available, and continue to pursue it, despite the many difficulties which arise, is admirable indeed. As I reflect on the relationship between the profession of law and that of journalism, it occurs to me that journalists and lawyers, or judges, as in my case, share some things in common. Of course, persons of both the professions are fierce believers of the aphorism that the pen is mightier than the sword. But they also share the occupational hazard of being disliked by virtue of their professions, which is no easy cross to bear. My judicial clerks have been telling me in recent times that I'm added to the list, that I better not scroll down Twitter. But members of both the professions keep at their daily tasks and hope that one day the reputations of their professions will receive a makeover. The magnitude of the task that journalists face in their careers was well described by G.K. Chesterton, who said, "Journalism largely consists in saying Lord Jones is dead to people who never knew Lord Jones was alive." Journalists are constantly engaged in the endeavor of simplifying complex information for the consumption of the public, which is frequently unaware of even the most basic facts underlying the issues which are sought to be exposed by them. This simplification of information must not be at the cost of accuracy, which further complicates the journalist's job. To use the words of one of your former editors-in-chief who is present here, the task of the journalist is simply cut the clutter. This is true the world over, and I'm sure Shekhar Gupta would agree with that. The media sparks debates and discussions which are the first step towards action. All societies inevitably become dormant, lethargic, and immune to the problems which plague them. Journalism in all its forms is one of the key aspects which prods us out of this collective inertia. The media has played and continues to play an important role in shaping the course of current events and, by extension, the course of history itself. Recently, the Me Too movement was sparked in part by the publication of stories concerning the accusations of sexual harassment against prominent figures in the film industry in the US. The Me Too movement has cascading effects all over the world and was a watershed moment in history. In India, the media's coverage of the rape of Jyoti or Nirbhaya by certain men in Delhi resulted in widespread protests and later in reforms in the criminal law. Even on a day-to-day basis, some news stories prompt questions and discussion in Parliament and in the legislative assemblies of the states. The media, it is right to say, is the fourth pillar in the conception of the state and thus an integral component of our democracy. A functional and healthy democracy must encourage the development of journalism as an institution that can ask difficult questions to the establishment, as it is commonly known, speak truth to power. The vibrancy of any democracy is compromised when the press is prevented from doing exactly this. The press must remain free if a country is to remain a democracy. And we are no exception. India has a great legacy of newspapers which have acted as catalysts of social and political change. Before independence, newspapers were run by social reformers and political activists in order to raise awareness and also as a means of outreach. Dr. Ambedkar launched several newspapers such as Mook Nayak, Bahishkrit Bharat, Janata, and Prabuddha Bharat to create awareness about the rights of the most neglected communities in India. The newspapers and other publications of the pre-independence era also gave us a picture of the detailed history of those times. These newspapers are now a source of knowledge, a historical record of the times when courageous men and women acted against the colonial rulers and fought fiercely for our independence. The newsprint voiced the aspiration of the soul, a yearning for freedom. Many journalists in our country, as well as across the world, work in difficult and unfriendly conditions, but they are relentless in the face of adversity and opposition. It is precisely this quality which must not be lost. As citizens, we may not agree with the approach that a journalist has adopted or the conclusion that they reach. I too, myself, find myself disagreeing with many journalists. After all, who amongst us agrees with all other people? But disagreement must not distort into hatred, and hatred must not be permitted to evolve into violence. No society can afford to accept hatred as a new normal. As you must be aware, the Supreme Court of India has emphasized on the rights of journalists in a number of judgments. In one judgment, the Supreme Court held, India's freedoms will rest safe as long as journalists can speak truth to power without being chilled by a threat of reprisal. Initially, the outreach of journalism was limited to the print media, but this has expanded with the introduction of television and the electronic media. I was taking a flight to the United States in 1982 to pursue a master's degree in law. Coincidentally, that was the day of the launch of color television in India. In the recent past, social media has been a game changer for journalists in more ways than one. Online platforms have provided an opportunity to individuals to launch their own online media channels. In that way, online platforms have led to the democratization of our media. Years ago, it was the paucity of space which was a constraining factor for the journalist. Now, perhaps, it is a paucity of reader patience. Readers have short attention spans. News is therefore reduced to shorts on YouTube or reels on Instagram. Our attention spans have seen a steady decline with the advent of social media. It is now the norm for short tidbits of information to be conveyed through 280 characters or in a few seconds. This is, however, an unsatisfactory replacement for long-form or investigative journalism. In fact, there can be no replacement for such reportage. It is also proving to be a challenge for journalists to penetrate the echo chambers that social media has created and to still illuminate the truth. Local or community-based journalism has played an important role in encouraging social cohesion and political activism. It has the ability to not only educate citizens, but also to raise the little-known concerns and set the agenda for debate on those issues at the policy level. Local journalism shines a bright light on local issues, people, and causes which many times may not get covered by the media at the national level. As several studies have shown that the composition of the mainstream media is not representative of all communities in India, community journalism has opened the avenues for the members of marginalized communities to be a voice for their own issues. The emergence of social media enabled them to create their own space and come up with independent media platforms. The relevance of the media was best highlighted during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. Electronic, print, and social media facilitated the state to disseminate relevant information to the general public at large, even during the lockdowns. Citizens were constantly reminded of the precautionary and preventive steps which were expected to be taken in order to ensure their well-being. The media highlighted administrative loopholes and excessives. Various high courts and the Supreme Court of India relied on news reports in taking suo motu cognizance of instances of violations of people's rights during the pandemic. Among them, I remember an article in Scroll, which was accoladed today, which says, why is Gujarat forcing hospitals to only accept COVID-19 patients coming through a 108 ambulance? Or the INRE case regarding the closure of midday meal schemes. INRE problems and miseries of migrant laborers. The suo motu writ petition regarding the distribution of essential supplies and services during the pandemic. And then breaking, the Allahabad High Court took suo motu cognizance of the Hathras case, says that incidents have shocked our conscience. These were all revelations on the media. I was recently asked as to which newsperson I followed with keen interest. My answer did not name a newsperson, but a cartoonist, the famed late Mr. R.K. Lakshman. Although he was not a journalist, he succeeded in accomplishing the core of the journalist's mission by holding a mirror to the powers that be. I'm sure that most of India will join me in considering Mr. Lakshman's cartoons to be incisive and witty commentaries. He was what we call an equal opportunity offender. Everyone stood the risk of being the subject of his cartoons, and most took it in good spirit when they were ridiculed. My favorite anecdote about him was that he thought that the famous UK cartoonist David Lowe was actually David Cow because of the manner in which Mr. Lowe penned his signature. I also joked that my favorite journalist, so to speak, was the one in the Hindi movie Nayak, which was the remake of the Tamil film Mudhalvan. Those who have watched either of these know that the protagonist is a journalist who is invited to take the place of the chief minister for a single day. He becomes wildly popular after doing this and becomes a politician. I see some young faces in the audience today, and I hope that they have not taken up journalism after watching this movie in their youth.